Welcome everyone to Food for Thought. It's a programme within Stronger Together, a portfolio of capacity building activities for professionals involved in social justice work. It's an informal gathering of people who learn from one another in discussing some of the most challenging issues of our time. Today's theme is Writing a Better World, and we're lucky to be joined by Athena Advanced client, Pauline Campbell. Pauline is a British writer and senior lawyer raised in London after her parents crossed thousands of miles to live in Britain, leaving the warm shores of the Caribbean behind. In 2020, Pauline Campbell published her first non-fiction book, Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips, one woman's story of overcoming racism in the esteemed courtrooms of London. Her first non-fiction book, Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips, Pauline is a Waltham Forest Council lawyer fighting for Windrush families who, like her own family, were invited to the UK from the West Indies after World War II. She's currently the legal advisor to the Windrush Reach Project and chair of the Race Equity Committee in Waltham Forest Council. So I'm now handing over to Laetitia, who's going to introduce us to today's topic.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are around the world today. So I have a short presentation just to introduce the topic, and then I will be having a series of questions and answer with our lovely Pauline. And hopefully we should have some time to have a nice, lovely conversation. And as I'm sure, just like me, anyone else who wants to ask any question to Pauline will have the opportunity to do so. Oh, give me 1 second. My computer apparently has decided to also be on holidays, and despite the fact that I did do a check before, it's not letting me share my screen right now. Okay, it should take me just 1 second. I guess I should potentially introduce myself mainly for you. Lucy, I'm going to have to drop out of this call to allow myself to share the screen. So could I kindly ask if you could quickly do a little introduction for me, and then I'll be right there as soon as I've done so. Fabulous.
Okay, so Laetitia is our Executive Vice President at the Athena Advisors. She's a sustainability expert and commercial manager with experience in building organizations' capacity. She has expertise in prospect research, climate justice, carbon neutrality, the circular economy, as well as upskilling, policy development, and governance. So Laetitia heads up our Athena Advance program, branch of the Athena Advisors. And so she works very closely with Pauline on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. If you can just give me permission to share my screen again, I should be able to share my presentation. Fabulous. We are ready. So today's topic is writing for a better world. And so obviously we'll be talking about literature, books, and more importantly, storytelling. And storytelling really is a unique skill that we have as a species. Only humans tell stories, and stories allows us to share information, build empathy, emotional connection, share our opinions, and also share information. It's how we record our history, forge our collective memories, and how we have a national identity. It's influenced culture, social norms, how we think about others, and it's played a critical role in instigating change and changing how we as a species, as different societies, think about the world in which we live today. So the question really that for me was important for the talk today is, has literature, again, writing, books, storytelling, ever changed the course of history? And funny enough, this ended up being quite a controversial question. One, because is history a flux, something that is already predestined and therefore can be changed by a book? Those are questions that philosophers have been asking for years, whether or not history can be changed or it's always changing, and therefore it's not about changing it, but influencing it. The second part is it literature and books in and of themselves, or are they the conversation, the movements that come from these books? And we'll be talking a lot with Pauline about the importance of having those tough conversations that are started by these social justice books. But it's what is sure that some books have certainly changed or influenced history, from religious texts like the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, to works of fiction like Ulysses or Shakespeare's plays. They've changed our societies, how we think of others. They've influenced social norms, our political systems, and they've given us our moral ideas, what is good, bad, righteous, evil. They've contributed to social justice, to advocating for the rights of women, people of color, the LGBTQ plus community. They've toppled governments and they've sparked revolutions across the world. And obviously, when more voices are represented and are included in rights of fiction, it bends history towards a more just world. So if we look, and this was very difficult to find, 3 examples, and obviously there are numerous examples we could use today, but throughout history, these are 3 examples I thought would be quite good for today. The first one is Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This book is said to be the cause of the American Civil War for some philosophers and thinkers. Some think this may be a little bit extreme, but what this book did is it had a major role in bringing awareness of slave life to the general public and treatments of slaves in America, and sparked a lot of ideas around how slavery should be dismantled and how all men and women should be equal. Along a similar line, The Rights of Men was written by Thomas Paine, a British man. This is not a book, but a political pamphlet. And the book was written as a response to a British publication that wrote a critique of the French Revolution and the ideas of democracy and freedom that came out of it in 1789. When he published it, Paine didn't think it would have the impact it would, but it really was one of the books that is at the heart of democratic philosophy, and it really swept through Europe and has influenced the French Revolution, so not just the movement in 1789, but what came after, particularly after the Terror, and it also influenced the American Revolution of Independence. The last book hopefully doesn't need too much introduction, but Origin of the Species by Charles Darwin. This is another book that fundamentally changed how we think about society politically, culturally, and religiously. It challenged traditional views of biology and the origin of men. And obviously, Charles Darwin never thought that his book would have the impact that it has in challenging the creation story of the world. So what is the role specifically of literature when we think about social justice? And here at the Athena Advisors, when we talk about social justice, we really see it as anything that touches on society, from climate justice, gender equality, to rights for every man and woman. And so literature can play a lot of different roles in advocating for this change. It obviously raises awareness of issues and helps to change perspective by informing us and educating us. It also builds rapport and empathy for those that are suffering from social justice issues, and it helps us challenge the status quo. In a lot of cases, it'll give a voice to the voiceless and the underrepresented, and it also provides an evidence base and advocates for change. So not only does it show the problems and the issues, but a lot of them will also provide solutions to the problems that we are facing. And obviously it can take loads of different formats, as we've seen with the previous examples. They can be books, pamphlets, they can target different audiences, from children to the young adults to adults, and it can be fiction or non-fiction. 3 more examples. The first one being French, I had to use a French example, but J'accuse by Émile Zola, which was published in 1898 in the newspaper L'Aurore. Émile Zola is a very famous French author, and he published his letter in response to the Dreyfus affair. This was a letter to the president of France, Félix Faure, at the time, and in the letter he accuses the government of anti-Semitism and the unlawful jailing of Alfred Dreyfus, a French army general, who was imprisoned under suspicion of espionage, so spying. And Zola's letter really led to changes in how the evidence base for people was gathered and how people would be put in prison. And it also raised a lot of question in terms of the anti-Semitic policies that the French government had at the time. Zola was prosecuted for libel and he had to fled France for England, only returning almost 10 years later to the country once he was forgiven for his acts. The second book, a little bit more recent, and some of you may have read it, Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race, was written by Rennie Eddo-Lodge and really started a national conversation on race relations in Britain. And as we'll see with Pauline Campbell today, this importance of having conversation, not just reading the book, is a topic today that we will be exploring. And finally, Dear Justice. This is a fiction work written specifically for young adults or new adults and children, teenagers, is a critique of the American penal system and particularly how they treat minors and people of color in the United States. This is a more recent book, but it has led to a lot of question as to the rights of people in the penal system, particularly minors. And before I start my wonderful conversation with Pauline today, what can we do to support social justice work? So obviously the first thing is to read the book and support authors that write on social justice issues. It is a category in and of itself in a bookstore, and some publishing house even focus on social justice books. One of our recommendations would be to choose a topic you may not know a lot about or be as familiar, and be willing to be challenged on that topic. A lot of the time, reading these books will challenge your status quo and your biased view of the world. And so you have to be willing to challenge those and to have the tough conversation that will come from these books. And as I mentioned before, the books in and of themselves may not lead to the change or instigate the changes we want to see, but what will is to continue to have conversation, continue to attend webinars, conferences like today, communicate with people, share your ideas in order to challenge the status quo. And as mentioned by Lucy, Pauline is one of our Athena Advance clients. We at the Athena Advisors strongly believe in writing and literature's role in advocating for social justice. And it's why we launched Athena Advance, which offers non-traditional public relations services to social justice authors. So if you are an author or if you know any authors that are looking to promote their book and have these conversations, raise this awareness, be present on the national scene, do send them our way. Now, without further ado, Pauline, my first question to you today is, what led you to start writing Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips? And did you always set out to write a social justice book? And if so, why?
Okay, hi everyone. I think that it's a journey that you don't plan to, I didn't plan to write a book on social justice. I think my journey took me to that place. And I think when my dad passed and I looked at the life that he had led, I realized that there was so much that he didn't get to say that I wanted people to hear. And he didn't get to say it because he was angry at the way he had been treated. And we as a generation, first born in Jamaica, born in Britain, we had a lot to say, but we didn't feel anyone really listened. So I couldn't understand what had gone wrong because I loved the country I was born in. I loved being British and I loved having white and black friends, but I just didn't feel that things were right. And I needed to understand why they weren't right and gelling for me. So I took myself on this journey to find out a bit more about the last 50, 60 years in Britain. And when I was born, what happened, what went on that led to us still being in such a inequitable position today. And I suppose that's what I did. It was a series of lots of things that led to me writing it, and to fulfill an answer within myself as to I owe it to myself to find out more. I didn't want to delve into certain areas, but it made me a better and stronger person to do it. So yeah, that's why I started it and did it.
And how much did your legal background influence how you wrote that book or how you thought about that journey through your book?
My legal background was, I think, the biggest hurdle I had to overcome, because I was writing like a lawyer at first instead of writing like me, Pauline. And I had three, and the editors were great. Each editor took me to the next level and helped me to find myself. But how I got the publishing deal, I suppose, is what made the difference, because it was a competition that I'd been shortlisted for on on equality. And these publishers were looking for writers to 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 look at how we could talk about social justice and publish books in that way. And when I got shortlisted, I realized that, yes, you do have something to say. But by the time I got to the end of my journey, after writing the book and being edited about 3, 4 times, I realized that you have to let go of the lawyer in you in order to truly reflect what you want to say. Because a lawyer is a job you do, it's not you. And in order for this book to have resonance, for it to be believable, you have to separate yourself from it and see that being a lawyer is at the end of this process, not at the beginning. It's where you started, which is the beginning of the process, not where you've ended up. And that helped me to understand more. And then it began to flow. But luckily, being a lawyer helped me to articulate the things I wanted to say, present myself in a certain way, do the things that I wanted to do with confidence, which really helped in the process.
And you mentioned your father's anger. Did you feel that same anger as you went through the writing of your book?
I feel anger all the time when I see any form of injustice. It hurts all of us when we see injustice. And it hurts because you don't believe that people care enough to stop it. And there's not enough of us trying to stop it in a positive way. There's a lot of us out there, but are our voices being heard? So it does hurt, but the more it hurts is the more empowering it makes you feel, because you know that you're on this journey and you have to see it through, and it's important. And it's hard for me because no one, somebody said to me on Saturday at an event I went to at my sister's, a good friend we grew up with in primary school. We knew her, we've known her for over 40, 50 years. She said, I take my hat off to what you do. I could never do what you do because I'm not opinionated enough. I don't care enough to do it. I want to do it, but I just don't think I can. And that really depressed me, because I thought, you've lived this journey and your voice is important, and you owe it to yourself to celebrate your voice and to say, oh, I'm just not opinionated enough to do it. You're living the inequalities that you're experiencing every day, so you don't realize you're a part of the process. But when we talked about it, I then realized everybody's different, and you have to allow them to live their journey and take it in their own way. So I will get hurt and do something about it, and write something and do an article or write a book. Others will feel hurt and hold it within themselves and accept the pain and deal with it internally. And that's the way they deal with it. So you have to respect how people feel about injustices. Not everybody's going to stand up and hold up a gauntlet and fight against it. But it doesn't mean they don't feel it just as much as you do.
I think that links really well with one of the questions I had for you. Obviously, your own personal journey and that of your parent has influenced writing this book. Do you think a person can write on a social justice issue without having experienced it themselves?
I think it would be hard, because you've got to make your writing believable. When somebody reads what they read, it is hard. But I mean, when you look at Amelia Gentleman, who wrote about the Windrush scandal, and how she had never experienced the racism that people had experienced, she wrote it from a feeling of understanding. And that made me realize that she did have an idea, and you don't have to actually experience it. Of course, you're coming from a more powerful place when you have experienced it. But if you have taken the time to understand the topic you are writing about, and you get behind that, and people believe what you write, then that's what's important. And the person that wrote the foreword for my book, Colin Freeman, he's a white male, and he didn't want to write the foreword for my book because he says this is a book about inequality and black people growing up in Britain, and I can't write, Pauline, I can't be the foreword. My publishers didn't want him to be the foreword for the book either. But I said that's exactly why you do need to do it, because I want people to understand that this is from a place of understanding. And when he did the foreword, it showed me exactly why I wanted him to do it, because he did accept that we have differences, but he also said that he was in a hospital when his first child was being born, and there was a black man with him. And when his child was born and the black man's child was born, he thought, what is that child's life going to be like in comparison to my child's? And that told me he got it. He got it. You don't have to experience inequality to understand how it can impact on somebody's life. And because of that, I hope it will make his daughter more understanding of what we experience. So yeah, it's important that we open the door for anyone who wants to write about social justice. If they do it in an informed way, then it can work.
And what are the key messages that you want people to take away when they read your book?
I think the most important message is don't be afraid to talk to people about how you feel about inequality. Don't allow it to be shut down. You've got to be honest enough, to be strong enough, to be open about it. People will, I mean, and I'm guilty of that too, because my final editor, they gave me a black woman as my final editor. I think they'd said, you know, we need somebody who can really resonate with Pauline and get to grips. And the first thing the black editor said to me was, you need to chat your business. Because I know a lot of black people don't like to chat their business. They don't like people to know their business. And you need to chat your business. You need to open up and let it out. And I'll tell you something funny. None of my family have read my book because they're scared of what's in there. I don't know what they think I've put in there, but because I'm including them in my life, they think that there's things in there that is going to reveal things about them that they wouldn't want people to know. But that just tells you how withdrawn we are in ourselves in wanting to share who we are. And I think for me, it was a road I had to take. So the key is open yourself up to the ridicule or to the celebration or to the understanding of who you are. Because when you put your words on paper, you're opening yourself up to everybody. You're allowing yourself to get rid of that veil. And when you write about yourself in the book, it does open the door for people to come at you in some ways, and talk to you in a way that makes you feel as if, are you doing this for the right reasons, or are you just one of those people that just keep talking about having a chip on your shoulder? And that's what happens. And some people say, well, racism's boring. I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's ridiculous. You get that flippancy. And that's the most painful thing. You write something that means a lot to you, and it impacts on so many lives. And because it doesn't impact on others, they belittle it. Or they don't want to accept it exists, so they do belittle it in another way. So I think the strongest key message is open yourself up to who you are, be honest about who you are, and celebrate who you are through your writing. The good and the bad, warts and all. because that's what makes you who you are, the warts and all.
And obviously, we've talked a lot in our work together about the importance of having these tough conversations. And for the people here today, do you have any recommendations on how they can approach these conversations, both in terms of instigating it themselves, but also if they are suddenly in one of those tough conversations?
I'm the chair of the Race Equality Network within Waltham Forest, and it's not easy being a lawyer who fights for social justice in this way, because a lot of lawyers, and I'm a senior lawyer here as well, so I manage a team and I deal with a lot of directors and people of that nature. And I had to think really hard about, what is this going to do to my career if I keep going with this? Is this going to damage me in some way? Will it damage me in some way? Because nobody wants to talk about something that makes them feel uncomfortable. Who wants to do that? None of us want to do it. I don't want to do it. But the way that I think we can open up is to trust each other a lot more. And being the chair, I've spoken to directors about, don't worry if you're scared to talk about it. That's good, because it's a genuine emotion. It's not, it's better that you're worried about talking about it and you tell me that, than you don't talk about it at all, because people will misinterpret that as you not caring. And if you care enough, you can talk to somebody who you know or who you trust about what you might determine to be inequality. The majority of the people I work with in director level are white males. The majority of the staff they deal with are people of colour. So they worry about starting this conversation, like Colin Freeman worried about being the forward for the book. But the beginning of the conversation is always the hardest. And if you say to me, I don't know how to start the conversation, I tell them, you've just started the conversation by telling me you don't know how to start. That's the beginning. And so I would say, no matter how bad it gets, be honest about being uncomfortable with this subject and say out loud, I wish I felt more comfortable about talking about this, but that's how I feel. And then that's the beginning. And I think a lot of people would resonate with that. If they're willing to be honest enough to say they don't feel comfortable, that's when we can begin starting this conversation.
And with the Windrush anniversary, are you seeing any change in people having these conversations? Anything positive in what is happening, or anything negative?
With the Windrush, it's a difficult one because everybody's celebrating the Windrush and we all recognise what the Windrush stands for. But inequality is still as rife as it's ever been. You've still got people struggling in a system where 1%, we only have 1% of black judges in a country which is made up of over 14% of us. We're still dealing with corporate directors where you have to spot somebody who looks like you. I've been shortlisted for legal awards and I sit in the room and I'm the only one there, or there's maybe 2, 3 of us, and I'm the only one who's nominated for the award. It's still very bad. But what is different and what is more powerful than it's ever been is that we are standing together, of all races, all colours are standing together against it. And we're not as frightened as we were, and our young people aren't as frightened as they were. They are strong in their mindset about inequality. They won't have it. They won't stand for it, and they are our future. And we have to hopefully guide them in the right direction to ensure that they understand the importance that each and every one of us are important. And so for me, that is important. But for the Windrush, my parents and their generation, it's never going to be easy. We're looking at the Windrush scandal happening when these people are in their late life. We're looking at the bank debacle with people's accounts being closed because they're expats living abroad. These things are still happening. But the good news is we're speaking up about it, and we're not going to allow it to just be brushed under the carpet. And we are not allowing it to just be forgotten. And so I think that is the strength. Our young people and social justice voices like myself and hundreds and thousands of others that are making a difference is what is the positive thing about what we're doing.
And what did you learn yourself writing this book? And would you write another one, another social justice book?
I learned a lot about me. I learned that I was resilient because I had to write it while I was still in full-time work. But one of the things I've learned is that nothing's impossible. You just go on autopilot. Some days you're so tired, you don't even know what you're going to do, but you just go on autopilot and you get it done. And I think the hardest thing for me is that I want to write another book. And there's so many books in me that I want to write, but unfortunately, I can't clone myself. And that's the hardest part because I want to get my clone to write the book while I'm doing all these other things. But that in itself won't stop me from writing another one. I definitely will. And I think I'm going to focus that book on the legal world and the significance of being a lawyer in an environment such as this. How do we navigate our way through? And I call it common law because I'm a Cockney girl from Hackney. I qualified really late. I work in an environment that's public sector. There's so many things that are different in the law I do in comparison to the big city firms, but there's a story in that in itself. So that's what I'd love to do and love to write about. But what I do though, as an alternative, is I write articles. Every time something hits me, I'll do an article on it. And I'll get it published in a magazine that's important within the legal world. And at the moment, Robin will tell you, I'm trying to get an article into the New Law, there's Cambridge Law Review. And the good news about that is they do blind recruitment on that now. They're no longer asking what your background is or what school you went to. And that for me is the next step for me in getting published in a review that is of significant empowerment for people who, like me, would never expect to get in there or get published. And I want to do it from a historical perspective on enslavement and the rights of a Black person in a legal justice system where they were chattel. From there to where they are now. And how did they fit into the legal system when they weren't even determined to be human beings? What did we do to get them that legal right? And it's such a powerful message that maybe other people will do that. And there's a book in that. So for me, I'm forever redeveloping who I am. Each time I hit one road and I get in there, I look at the next road. Okay, I want to get in there. And then when I get in there, then I'll go to the next level and say, how can I get into there? And that's what we've got to do. We've got to constantly, as people, continuously take ourselves to the next level forever in everything we do. Because nothing's impossible. And too many of my generation have given up. They've lost their way, or they just don't believe that there's anything in them, or they've lost their fight. And that's so painful to think that they've lost their fight. They've given up. They're doing things they don't want to do. They're settling for less because they think that's all they're worth. And that breaks my heart.
And obviously, the legal world is really interesting because you would think that it can promote social justice and equality. What are your views on the role of law in and of itself in promoting social justice?
At the moment, we're in a battle as social justice lawyers in particular, because we're dealing with a government that is ostracizing social justice lawyers right now. It's not good. It's not good right now. And we have a fight on our hands because we're called lefty lawyers or do-gooders. These are the things that we're dealing with right now, which I know we've always had this kind of stigma, but never as bad as this. So now we're going to see who's strong and who's not, because a lot of lawyers will back away from this fight. The law is the only thing we have to give us the protection we need against injustice when we need to fight against it. The law is the ultimate thing we use, because everyone has the right of access to justice. It goes right back to the Magna Carta. And the problem that we have, is it true that everyone has the right of access to justice, not just from a color perspective, but from a financial perspective? Really, do we have that right? And that at the moment is where for the first time ever as a lawyer, I am not sure if our legal system at the moment is fit for purpose when it comes to access for justice. It's within a lot of lawyers, it's within us to do the right thing, but how many of us are strong enough to stand up against it if our careers are at risk? So judges will not break down on opening the door to more diversity. They're still saying that it's something that they're pushing back on. That is a problem we have. So many people from certain backgrounds are faced with judges who know nothing about them. So I think that the legal world has regressed in relation to equality. I think it's regressed, and it's up to us to put it back on the right road, which is what we're trying to do at the moment.
And until your next book is out, what would be your recommendation in terms of social justice books? What should we all have read or read?
I think that it's hard to say. For me, I suppose why I'm not talking to white people about race is a very strong book. But I read it and I found it quite, what's the word? Clinical. But the reason I found it clinical, because I was a Black woman reading it from my perspective. But what I did find about that book was it was fantastically informative. It was brilliant at giving you the history that you needed to know about. So I would recommend that book if you're not looking for the hearts and the flowers and the emotions. That's the book to look at for the future. David Olusogo's written some fantastic books. I'd love to meet him one day, and I will. But I think for me, the best books to read are fictional books on racism, fictional books which highlight the issues that people experience when they're dealing with racism. But I rather watch films. I like to watch films because they bring things alive for me. And you're not going to believe this, but one of the films that really has hit home for me on racism was Gone with the Wind. That's the weirdest thing, isn't it? Because it's not Gone with the Wind that has empowered me. It's the story behind it, about Clark Gable and all the things that happened during the making of that film. And I think for me, we have to be very open-minded about the media and books. I've read a book called West Indian Women in the War, in World War II, and how we talk about their role from the ATS, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, and all the things these 30 Black women did in the war. and how they came to Britain, these accomplished Black women, and how the only reason they got to Britain was because America did a deal with Britain to let them in, because America didn't want any Black officers there. So Britain thought the only way they could deal with this was to get these 30 Black women here. And then we ended up getting 100 women here from the ATS in the same year that Queen Elizabeth at 18 joined the same regiment. And when I read those stories, I really get to grips with what life was like. Because when I look at Queen Elizabeth at the time, Princess Elizabeth, that was the first time she disobeyed her parents and did something they didn't want her to do. So I make comparisons between women's struggles for equality in different ways by reading the book. I read between the lines. So there's millions of books you can read. I could never give you lots and lots. But what I would say is always have an open mind about a book and always be open to what it can offer you between the lines. If you're going to read Gone with the Wind, don't just read Gone with the Wind. Read the story behind the making of Gone with the Wind as well, because behind it, there's some inspirational stories about the fights against racism, which people would never begin to understand. So I could talk forever about it, but these are the things I would say. I would suggest that people read and think about and watch lots and lots of films. And as a Black person, people say you shouldn't like black and white films because the only people in there are Black people serving and selling food or being maids. And you think, well, we can't cut ourselves off from society and what it was at the time. But more importantly, we have to acknowledge that those people were making a living and earning a good living doing these jobs within the acting world. And whether we agree with what the system was about, we've got to put ourselves in their shoes at that time in order to understand the importance of cultural and societal change. Not all my Black colleagues agree with me on that. But that's what the world makes the world such a wonderful place, that we don't always agree on things and we can be more open-minded about what we think in relation to those things.
I'll ask my final question, which goes back to the question I raised in my presentation, and I'll open it up to the floor. Do you think that literature, storytelling, writing has changed the course of history?
For those who have an agenda, yeah, it has. The Bible, for instance, the Bible was used to perpetuate slavery for some people and to end it for others. Literally, the Bible was used as a way of confirming that you must live to the master and do what the master says. Whereas the Quakers used the Bible to say this was wrong. This is wrong what you're doing. So everybody uses literature in their own way in order to perpetuate their own aim, their own will. And so for me, it can change history, but it would depend on what perspective you're looking at. And Hitler was fantastic at manipulating literature. Look at World Book Day. They burn all those. How awful was it to see all those books being burned? All that amazing literature being burnt in the square. Look at all of that. It tells you how powerful literature can be and how other people want to destroy the power of literature because of its power. So I think that for me, literature can change the face of the world, but you've also got to remember it can also manipulate it too. And it depends on who is using it for their own ends. That's when it can change the world and change those of us that are around it.
Thank you so much, Pauline. This was absolutely fantastic. And in the last 10 minutes, I want to encourage Roisin, Diana, Christine, Lucy, Robin. If any of you have any questions for lovely Pauline, now is your moment.
I just want to say thank you so much, Pauline. That was really fascinating. I really enjoyed hearing about you and your work. and I've been looking up where to buy it. As an avid reader of anything and everything. And what really struck me, I think, as you were talking, was how the bravery involved in this at so many different levels. So the bravery of just putting yourself out there in the first place, of being, is this your first book? Is that right?
I've written a fictional book, but this is my first non-fictional book. Yeah.
Right. And the putting yourself out there from the personal perspective, and the kind of you talked about your family not wanting to read it because of that sense of public exposure, I guess, and how brave all of that is. And you kind of had this thing about what does it mean for my career. So firstly, to say thank you for being so brave and just putting it out there and being able to feel comfortable doing that. But the question is, has it had any negative impacts for you on a kind of personal level?
From my family perspective, it has, because my family, when you are like this, it involves sacrifice.
Yeah.
And my family love me, they care about me, but they believe that I'm giving up too much of myself with them in order to push this agenda. But I think that can happen for all of us when we make a decision. But I think that in itself is not a problem, because I've got a motto that now comes, that I show no fear. I love my family, and I know I do. And I have no doubt about how I care about my family. So I won't allow my sister to make me feel bad about all the time I give to the social justice aspects of my job and my life. On my social media, I only use LinkedIn because I really love that professionalism around the LinkedIn social media pages. And every one of the directors and chief execs have logged in, have joined me. Now, at first, I thought, have they joined me because they really are celebrating what I'm doing, or have they joined me because they're keeping a tab on what I'm doing? And in the end, I thought, what difference does it make why they joined me? They've joined me, and I've got to continue on my journey. And this morning, I opened it up, and the new chief exec, a lady called Lindsay Egan, who's our head of the entire council, she sent a message to me from LinkedIn today with a copy of the story that I've been working on in the Independent about NatWest and how awful they're being to a 92-year-old man. And she said that she's read this and she wants me to know that it's amazing how I'm striving for equality, pushing the boundaries. And she said that it's powerful, and she's honored to know me. And so for me, that shows, and I said to her, thank God you're working with us. This is great. We've got a chief exec that's on the same page when it comes to equality, but it could have been the alternative. So I suppose it's scary. You don't know. Some racism's come on my page a couple of times, about people attacking me in relation to the things I say when I'm talking about certain topics. But I find that I'd rather they come on and not abuse me, but they talk about equality being a sham. You're being silly. This is ridiculous, that kind of thing. And I find that it's important that they talk to me about it, because I would rather they do that than not do it. And I suppose we've got to the point now where I'm beginning to think, what difference does it make whether I do it or not? It's more important that I do it than not do it. So I'll just keep doing it, irrespective of what might happen, or any issue with work. But I've had to be a better lawyer, the best lawyer I can be. I can't afford to drop the ball on my work. If anything, I've got to work twice as hard now to show that I'm a fantastic lawyer doing all the things I need to do. Because if I do drop the ball, it will be harder for me with all the things I'm doing.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all the great work you're doing, and also for helping educate people like me. And I'll be the one to put my hand up and say, 5 years ago, I would dance around and I'm not really sure how to do this as a white person. And I personally feel that there's been a lot of progress in that. We've got a hell of a long way to go, of course. But thank you.
We need to talk. All of us need
Absolutely.
to talk and be open about it. And it's good we are talking. And we can't do this alone. We can only do it together. That's my philosophy on everything to do with equality in this world. We have to do it together, or it's just not going to happen. And that's just not about colour. That's about women. It's about disabilities. It's about everything that people experience, which from an inequality perspective.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you, Pauline. Any final question before we bring our session to a close? Go ahead, Robin.
I'm tempted to find a question or two, but frankly, this has been so complete and whole. And I really want you to know that, Pauline and Laetitia, you've prepared so thoughtfully for this. And Pauline, I always learn a lot speaking to you, and you have a way of talking in a way about hard things in a way that people can hear, which is a trait that I love, and I love it in you. So I don't have a question, because it's been really quite complete to hear you, and I thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I think the relationship that I've built with Athena has been all empowering for me, purely because we come from different backgrounds, but we all want the same thing. And that's what I love about everyone that I've met on this journey of equality. And I call it a journey of equality. You meet people who you would never, ever meet normally in this world. And because of the work I'm doing, I'm meeting people from everywhere. And I was in Argos the other day, just looking for something in the catalogue. And a woman came up to me and she says, I hope you don't mind, but I've been following you on LinkedIn and I wanted to tell you I just love all the work you're doing. And my husband was waiting outside and got really annoyed because I was in there for so long, and he thought, what are you taking so long for? And then when he came in, I just had to explain that me and this lady were talking about the things that empowered both of us. But I don't know this lady. I didn't even know she was following me. And I just happened to be in Argos looking up some stuff, and she approached me and said, thank you. And that, I suppose, makes you feel this is why we need to do this. This is why we need to do this, because we're giving a voice to people who may not otherwise have had one. And maybe in time, they'll use their own voice. And that's the aim. You don't want to be their voice forever. You want them to use their voice. And stand up for what's right.
Don't think we could have ended on more powerful words.